And I'm going to turn things over now to the man, the host of the evening, who, of course, is Michael Enright, and he's the host of Sunday Edition on CBC Radio 1.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. Good to see you here. Critics and reviewers liked the word sprawling to describe the novels of Edward Rutherfurd, which indeed they are. Large, lusty, filled with cathedrals of indelible characters, all woven seamlessly into a rolling narrative of human and geographical history. He is the master of the historical novel. His first novel, Sarum, was published in 1987. It took 4 years to write, and it was an immediate bestseller. His latest book, Paris, is on the same glide path. I think you can be rest assured about that. Paris looks at the world's most romantic city from its earliest days right up to the liberation of the city in 1944 and the students' revolt in 1968. The novel is populated by the famous, but Gustave Eiffel, Ernest Hemingway, Coco Chanel, Dreyfus, Robespierre, and by the unknown, members of 6 families and their descendants who interact with one another and with their great city. It is physically a heavy book to pick up, and once you start it, it is impossible to put down. Edward Rutherfurd was born in the English cathedral city of Salisbury. He was educated at Cambridge University and the Stanford Business School in California. His novels have been translated into 20 languages and have sold in the millions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Edward Rutherfurd.
Thank you for that much too kind introduction. I hope you like the French beret. Had to dress for the part. Thank you all for coming. And some years ago, I was invited by a friend of mine who is the editor of the Dictionary of National Biography in Ireland to join an august institution called the Kildare Street and University Club. And I went along there to be interviewed, as they don't call it an interview, but of course that's what it is. Namely, I was invited to dinner. And beforehand, James, my friend, said to me, "Oh, by the way, don't tell them you're a novelist." Because novelists, even in Ireland, are not well seen. So we were getting along absolutely famously at this dinner. I felt I was amongst friends. And then one of them leant across the table to me and said, "I understand you write books. Good. What sort of books are they exactly?" And entirely forgetting James's injunction, I said, "Oh, well, they're novels." The entire table fell silent. They all turned and looked at James. "Oh, well," he said, "he does a lot of research." They were short of members that year. I was lucky to get in. But contrast that with the attitude of the French. Victor Hugo, in the 19th century, they named an avenue after him in his own lifetime, so that his address was Monsieur Hugo, in his house, in his avenue. Doesn't get much better than that. And when he died, they gave him a state funeral. There are incredible photographs of this, with this massive catafalque lying in the arch of the Arc de Triomphe. And it took, I think it was 3 or 4 hours for the procession to go by. So there's something for a novelist to work for. And I have a little guy in my book, Thomas Gascon. He comes from the area known as the Maquis, which was the shantytown slums on the back of Montmartre. And his family are pretty rough, warm people, and he goes, as did all Paris, to the funeral of Victor Hugo, and he manages to get up onto one of the buildings where he's got a bit of a vantage point over the crowd because the sidewalks, the pavements were full. And if you want to see this spot, just go down the Champs-Élysées about 60 yards from the Arc de Triomphe, from the Étoile, and there's a cinema on the right, and that's where I think he was. And in order to do this, he'd thought it through before. He got a rope round his waist and he attached that to the balcony behind him and tied it tight. And while he's there, he sees a girl. It's like Dante and Beatrice. He knows that this entirely ordinary girl is the woman for him, no other. So after a while, he tries to get down so that he can join her. But the rope is stuck. So he looks down and he trod on the head of a man to get up there. And he says, "Has anybody got a knife?" And no reply. Then he sees the man he trod on and he said, "Have you got a knife?" And the man says, "Yes." And he said, "Can I borrow it?" And the man says, "No." Actually, it's a little stronger than that in the book, but this is a family audience. And so he's now urgent, and he says to the man, "I've got to go. Would you like it on your head?" So the man passes up a knife. For a year, he gets down, and of course the girl's disappeared. For a year, this little guy goes all over Paris in the hope that he might spot her. He goes back to the spot where they met at the time where they met. People in love do these foolish things. Sometimes he takes his little brother, and he never sets eyes on her until one evening. And this is how every romance should begin. It was already growing dark as he crossed the Pont d'Iana to the right bank. Ahead of him, on the slope overlooking the bridge, stood the strange, Moorish-looking Trocadero, concert hall, as it then was, built a decade ago for the last World's Fair. Thomas smiled to himself as he passed this exotic palace. 10 minutes later, he was at his lodgings, but he didn't go in. He was feeling hungry. If he walked for another 5 minutes up the Rue de la Pompe to where it crossed Victor Hugo, there was a little bar where he could get a steak and some haricots verts. He'd earned it. Still feeling rather cheerful, he trudged contentedly along. On his right, he came to the railings of the Lycée Janson de Sailly, and this made him smile again. All Paris knew the story of the grand new school that had recently opened on the Rue de la Pompe. The rich lawyer, whose name it bore, had discovered his wife had a lover. His revenge had been sweet. He had disinherited her and left his entire fortune, down to the last sou, to build a school for boys only. Though the lycée had only just opened, it was already fashionable. Thomas wondered cheerfully what had become of the widow. There was still a glow of gaslights coming through the windows. No doubt the cleaners were finishing their work. As he watched, he saw the lights starting to go out. He paused. Why did he pause? There was really no reason at all. Just idle curiosity to see the cleaners come out. A moment later they did. 2 women, one old, one younger, though he couldn't see their faces. The older one crossed the street. The younger turned up it. He continued walking. He came level as he reached a lamp outside a doorway. He glanced at her and stopped, dead in his tracks. It was the girl from the funeral. It had been so long since their brief encounter that he'd almost put her out of his mind. He wondered if he'd even recognize her, yet now that he saw her, even in the lamplight, he hadn't the slightest doubt. He'd looked all over for Paris for her, and here she was, hardly a mile from where he'd first seen her. She was a few paces in front of him now. He drew level again. She looked across, sharply. "Have you been following me?" "No, I was walking up the street when you came out of the lycée." "Keep walking, then." "In that case, you will be following me," he said cleverly. "I don't think so." "I will do it as you ask, but first I have to tell you something. We have met before." "No, we haven't." "You were at the funeral of Victor Hugo." She shrugged. "And?" "Et alors?" "You were in the front row, on the Champs-Élysées. A soldier made you move." He paused. She gave no reaction. Do you remember a man hanging out from the railings on the building behind? No. That was me. I have no idea what you're talking about, but she was thinking. I remember a crazy man. He was saying vulgar things to a man below him. That's right, he smiled. That was me. You're disgusting. Get away from me. I went looking for you, so now you found me. F off. You don't understand. I went to the same place in the Champs-Élysées for weeks. Did you ever go there again? No. Then I went from district to district, all over Paris, for over a year in the hope of finding you. My little brother came with me sometimes. I promise you this is true. She stared at him. I work on Mr. Eiffel's tower, he continued proudly. He knows me. She continued to stare at him. Do you always piss on people's heads? She said. Never, I swear. She shook her head. I think you must be crazy. There's a bar over there. He pointed up the street. I was going to eat something. I'll give you supper. It's a respectable place. You'll be quite safe. When you want to leave, I won't follow you. She paused. You really looked for me all over Paris for a year? Could you hear anything?
I trust you'll leave the beret on, I hope.
Oh, I think you stay in part, don't you think?
I should have brought my red one. There are so many grand pictures in the novel, large tapestries, large panoramic things, but I want to start with a small detail. Louis XIII had a double row of teeth. How do you know a thing like that? Did you check his dental records or what?
Some of my French cousins come from a long line of dentists.
He must have had a crowded mouth, did he? I mean,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that was his... I think it must have been immensely discouraging for him, and I think he had an unfortunate personal life on account of it. I think that's the truth. You know, he and his wife were quite sort of distant. I think he was a difficult fellow.
When you begin a project, do you start with the research? Is that the idea? Do you pick a site, for example, Dublin, New York, London?
It's very difficult in this sense. I usually walk the place. Now, of course, when you walk a place, your imagination runs riot. And on the one hand, it gives you indelible impressions and things that are probably going to last through the book with you. On the other hand, of course, it may mislead you because you don't really know what you're looking at, depending on where it is, naturally. So then you have to start trying to educate your own responses, educate the imagination. Now, in the case of Paris, it was a little different. I was lucky enough to have, to be in a family where since the 19th century, since quite early in the 19th century, people have been marrying French men or French women. So I have a slew of French cousins.
And you speak French?
Very badly, but I can make myself understood. And above all for me, you know, by knowing a bunch of French families well from my childhood and living in their houses, you get a certain sense of how people live and how they are, and it's a sort of sense of it validates what you're doing when you're writing. So that's how I come by that.
How do you come to pick the particular bit of geography? How would you happen to pick New York City, for example, or Dublin, or indeed a forest, the New Forest in England?
Mostly for different reasons, I think. Essentially, as of this moment, I have about 7 books in pre-production, as they would say in the movie industry. Some of them I've been mulling over for years. 2 of them I've been thinking about for 12 years. And, you know, sometimes they sort of go away. What looks like a great idea after a little while isn't anymore. Others grow more and more urgent. And then you have the business that you have to talk to publishers all over the world just to make sure that a good number of them actually think it's a good idea, because otherwise they won't really do what's needed. So all of that comes together, and you know, it varies so much. I mean, the forest,
which is the book of mine that has sold the least, was probably the favorite for me to write, because I'd known it since my childhood. It's right beside Sarum. I had my grandfather and my great-aunt lived there. I love the place, and I love the people. It's basically full of criminals. I mean, you know, those people, the same families, have been living there and breeding with each other for more than 1,000 years. And they're smugglers and they're poachers. And so when I'm working there in the research library, I'll see in 1278, you know, John, I would say the real name was Stride. The family's called Pride in the book. John Stride, you know, is done for poaching in 1278. And John Stride is sitting opposite me at the same table, you know, because it's his descendant. I love that.
How can you possibly have 7 novels going at the same time? What, in pre-production, whatever you said?
Well, I go from one to another, you know.
Is it like those chess
me.
masters who go and play 12 different games at once, or what?
It's more like putting 6 cakes in an oven and opening the door now and then to see if any of them seem to be cooking.
All right, you've picked a site,
Yeah.
either Paris or the New Forest. What's your next step? What do you do next? You seem to marinate yourself in research. It's extraordinary.
Are you suggesting I drink too much?
No, take it as you will. No, but the research that goes into it, you're a novelist.
Yeah.
You can make things up. That's your license. That's your warrant.
That's right.
But you don't. You go in, you demand some kind of historical accuracy.
There are 2 things going on here.
Okay.
One, I try to... somebody who writes a popular historical novel is actually a propagandist. They may not want to be, but they are, whether they like it or not. And even more so a movie maker. You make a historical movie like Braveheart, you know, a lot of people are going to believe that that is how it is, and they may have their prejudices either awakened or reinforced, all these things. So actually, without being pompous about it, and without actually wanting to have to do it, you have a certain responsibility when you're doing this stuff. So in that sense, to the general public, because you are purveying ideas in a very insidious way, and I try therefore to do that responsibly.
But
that's one thing.
We wouldn't know. For example, you could say that Lewis has 4 rows of teeth, and we wouldn't know the difference.
That is true, but there are all sorts of subtler things. Where, you know, I mean, you look back at historical novels in the past and look at who the villains are, and it's nearly always whichever race was out of fashion at that particular time. And therefore, let me give you, if I may, and it's a historical example, but it went straight into fiction as well as non-fiction. There was a massacre in Ulster in the 1640s. And it was said that the Irish Catholics had arisen and slaughtered the Protestants. Well, actually, it was much more complex, and it was a 2-way street, and maybe 5,000 people, you know, died, 50-50 each. Within a very short space of time, it was being said that these animalistic Irish Catholics had slaughtered 300,000 Protestants. There weren't 300,000 people there even. And that went into, it's like an urban myth, that went into the woodwork. And even in Victorian England, in the House of Parliament, people were still citing this as a reason why the Irish should not be able to govern themselves. In a subtler way, novelists do the same thing, whether they like it or not. So, I research. The other side of the research is, when you're constructing one of these big books, and it is a big construct, of course, it's very architectural, because if it isn't, it won't resonate, it won't hold together. And I do these huge, you know, 20 to 40 page synopses, and at the end of the book I'm always surprised by how close I've stayed with the synopsis. But when you're doing that, sometimes you're just inventing a plot. Let's say you've had 2 romances, you know, okay, well, it's time to have something else. We better have a theft or a murder story or something. And that's what you're supposed to do as a novelist, just like a playwright. You've got to, you know, keep things moving along. But at other times you may say, you know, I'm not quite sure what plot I want here. And then I go into the research more and more, and I always, without fail, find the story in the research. And then you try to look to see whether it's something that in some way evokes or mirrors the history at the time. Can I just give you a simple plot and then an evoking of history? When I was writing the London book, I have a chapter which I really enjoyed writing at the time of Chaucer. Wonderful, high Middle Ages, rich culture with London Bridge with its tall gabled houses, like a dam across the River Thames. And I discovered in the records of the Waterman's Company that a little apprentice had once dived out of one of those houses and saved his master's daughter who'd fallen into the river, and it was like a mill race. And that is exactly the story in the book. And in reality, that fellow did indeed get his master's daughter in marriage, became an alderman, became Lord Mayor of London, and his descendants became Dukes of Leeds. So, that was real, and it was just right for my story. Now, you talked about Louis XIV. Louis XIV, I'm pretty sure, was not the son of Louis XIII. He was almost certainly the son of Cardinal Mazarin, who was the Queen's lover subsequently, but I think he was then. And some French people like that and some do not. But so therefore the story for that flashback in the book, for that period, is about illegitimacy.
To get the geography, the ancient geography done, do you look at old maps, or how do you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Paris has wonderful collections. Actually, they have done a 2-volume atlas of the city of Paris. It's the most lavish production I've ever seen. And you can actually, I mean, this is where you have to limit the research. Mm-hmm. Because I can go street by street, house by house, and I can actually tell you, where the house, exactly what the house was, and very often in some periods, who was living there. So, I mean, you could write a 1,000,000-page book with all the information there is, but I kept it down to a brief 800 pages.
How it took 4 years to write Sarum.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to write a novel now of this complexity and depth and heft?
It depends on the complexity is the answer. London took 5 years to write. And the reason why it took so long, and some of it was great fun to write, but it was that you think of the audience. People will have so many expectations for what they expect to find there. So London Bridge has got to be there, building of St. Paul's has got to be there, this and that. And there were so many things that I knew that huge numbers of people would be disappointed if they were not there.
Because they were familiar with it.
Because they were familiar with it. People all over the world. And of course you can't please everybody, but I finished up doing a huge, it was like a 3-dimensional jigsaw. Writing The Forest, there were no expectations in particular, and it was much quicker to write. I actually write quite fast. I've written as many words as John Grisham in the same, amount of time, which makes him a lot cleverer than me. But at Paris, there are expectations, all right, but it's a limited number, unless you're going to try to satisfy the French. And so
it's a feckless endeavor, isn't it?
You're not going to win. So right from the start, I just thought we're not going to try and do that. And I thought we won't sell this book to the French, so don't waste time, make your life easy. And so I said, I've been in the book selling business, so I said to my agents in London, now look guys, there's only one way you stand any chance of selling this book to the French. Has anyone here ever been in sales?
Oh yes, we got some, yes.
So you're going to know what I'm saying. If you're trying to sell a book to a bookseller and you know it's no good, then what you do is this. You start to take it out of your bag and then you say, oh no, you don't want this. And you put it back. And so I thought of a variation on that, and I said to my agents, you go to the French publishers and you simply say, I'm sorry, the author refuses to sell this book into France. And I'm so annoyed because they didn't have the cojones to do it. And they're still trying to flog the damn thing when we've sold everybody else.
You do something in Paris I don't think you did in your other novels. You bend time. You jump backwards and forwards in time. Was that a difficult thing to do?
No, it wasn't. But the reason why I did it, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you. I thought, first of all, two things. As time passes on when you're reading these books, you yearn to put more structure in them. You want to make it better made, more operatic, whatever. It's rather like, Vivaldi's Four Seasons is absolutely perfect. If you listen to a lot of the other music of Vivaldi, you realize that the Four Seasons is all prefigured there, because in that century, people were always reusing their music anyway. And then finally, it all came together. And in a sense, you hope to do the same one of these days. So I wanted the book to be better constructed. I wanted it to be a single family saga, but I also wanted to tell the history of Paris. Now, if you tell the whole history for 2,000 years, you've got a very long book, because it's got to hold together. The story's got to flow right the way through. So I thought, well, why not? Let's use flashbacks. And they were fun to do, and they link, and of course all the flashbacks in this book contain a secret that the protagonists, the people in the book, don't know about their own families and their relationships and so on and so forth. I mean, there's one where a guy who's called Roland de Signe believes that he's descended from the great hero Roland, as in the Chanson de Roland, the friend of Charlemagne. And in fact, it turns out in the Middle Ages that there were two sons, and the eldest son was called Jean, and his father, casting about for a name for his second son, decided to call him Roland because that was the name of his favorite horse. So, you do that. So this was the idea, and the hope was that I was going thereby to make the book shorter.
Didn't work, did it?
Did not work. Totally failed. Huge apologies.
Wonderful. You touch on some subjects in the book that I think are, as you did with the Irish books, subjects of religion. Now, I did not know, and that's not surprising, about the expulsion of the Jews, for example, in France. And I knew about the Huguenots and the St. Bartholomew's Day and so on. Yep. Why did you, there's quite a lot on those subjects in the book.
It happens that there were, as all over Europe, the Jews were expelled, and then they got let back in because, of course, they were a wonderful way of the king raising cash. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So you took all their assets, and then you got them back, and so on and so forth. And, of course, none of the debts. I mean, the king would say, this is monstrous. These people have unfairly encumbered you with all these debts. I'm going to throw them out, but you still owed the money, and you had to give it to the king. I mean, it was totally fraudulent. And it so happens that the most famous expulsion of the Jews, and the one which actually kept them out for a long time, for several centuries, took place at exactly the moment of the fall of the Knights Templar. And the fall of the Knights Templar was exactly the same story. The king wanted their assets. All the trumped-up charges about all these things that these guys were supposed to be doing were complete nonsense. It was shameful. So there's two of... a lot of them were executed in the end, but above all, he seized all their assets with the help of the Pope, who was then a Frenchman. So, that made a wonderful... two stories coming together to a theme that resounds through the Middle Ages and beyond. So that's why that expulsion of the Jews. And of course, it also is a background because I have a Jewish family, the family of Jacob, who are descendants of the family that are expelled, in the book, and then we see what happens to them at the time of the occupation in the early 1940s. So, and that's, for me, is a very moving thing. Interestingly, I'm sure you all know La Madeleine, that beautiful church right in the middle of Paris, staring down on the Place de la Concorde. Did you know that originally it was a synagogue?
I did that after I read the book, yes. Is it difficult to affect the balance between the fictional narrative, which we're dying for, and the history? Is it hard to reach a equilibrium there?
Yes, it is.
Is it? Yeah.
It is, and of course it depends on the subject. It depends on what you reckon people know or not. Yeah, in my earlier books, you know, I started, as you will understand so well, modelling Sarah to a large extent, structurally, on the books of the late and great James Michener, because that guy really invented this genre. And so structurally, and he doesn't hesitate at certain points just to come in and, you know, give you some pages of fact, just as in the middle of The Godfather, there's 16 pages of non-fiction, smack in the middle of the book. So you can do it. I'm trying, as time goes on, to meld it more smoothly into the story, but I don't think that the reader minds occasionally, not too often, but occasionally just being taken out for a few paragraphs and told something.
You're very generous in your public acknowledgement of Michener as a kind of, not a mentor, but someone that you, he didn't invent the genre, did he?
I think he did.
Really?
I think the multi-generational saga, as they call it. Yeah, I think he did. I don't write the same way as I don't write the same way as Michener. I mean, everybody has their own style. As often happens, you know, while Michener was alive, a bunch of followers tried to write Michener books, and of course what they did is they took all his idiosyncrasies and copied them, and of course the result was not very fortunate usually. I just write it my own way, but the structure is interesting.
When you finish one novel, do you go immediately into preparation for the next, or do you, Georges Simenon used to write a book every 2 weeks and then have a nervous collapse and get married or something?
That was delicately put. For those of us that know about the Simenon household, you either know or you don't, and I'm not going to tell you.
All right, good.
It was really awful. But do I go straight into another
Or take
book?
a break, yeah.
I take maybe a week or so. Depends what there is to do, like if I've got to move house or something, you know, that's when I do it. But otherwise, until very recently, I had 2 children to educate, so I went straight back to work.
You went from being a bookseller, among other things, to writing books. Was there something so terrible about being a bookseller, or you just always wanted to write since you were a wee tad?
Well, writing's in the family. There's even a distant connection, and it is there to Walter Scott, whose mother was a Rutherfurd. And my grandmother was a prolific romance novelist in the late 20s and 30s. And she, I should explain that the Rutherfurd, you know, part of the family, whose name I use, they married their cousins, frequently their first cousins, throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, almost without exception. I'm a great believer in marrying your cousins because at least you know what you're getting. And of course, it can have its disadvantages, as we know, but also I do believe if you're going to do anything in the arts, it helps hugely to be inbred. When one of my aunts was going to get married to a very, very staid and conventional family, she was interviewed by her future husband's 2 sisters. And they started questioning her in a way that sort of puzzled her a bit. And then finally she started to realize that they were asking her whether there were any genetic faults in the family. And she said, oh no, absolutely, there's nothing like that at all. Well, unless you count madness, of course.
But, and I tread softly here, Rutherfurd is a pen name.
Exactly.
Is it not?
Exactly.
You're not wanted by the police or anything. I mean, is it an alias or what?
Well, as I say, I didn't quite realize this myself as much. My father's name is Wintle, which is a very, very nice old farming name from the Severn Valley in the west of England, and they've been there forever. And it's a nice name, yeoman's name. But I found in America that nobody could get it right. They either think you're Winthrop, especially if you've got an English accent.
Of course, yeah.
You know, or Wendell, or sometimes even Winchell. And any of those are fine, but they happen not to be the name. And I should say that my dear ex-wife's family still, some of them still can't get my name right. They can't spell it right. And they're entirely literate. So I sat down with my agent. I mean, come on, writing a novel is a difficult thing. If you give people a name they can't even handle, you really are making your life even more difficult than it is.
Two strikes against you. Yeah.
Two strikes against you before you've, put pen to paper. So I sat down with my agent and we went through a bunch of family names. And when we came to Rutherfurd, we both said, hey, that's it. What I didn't appreciate until actually years later, well, I knew about the inbreeding, but I didn't realize quite the extent to which, for instance, my grandmother's writing and many other characteristics that she had came from the Rutherfurd family, which was so strong. I mean, if you look at my DNA, you'll find far more Rutherfurd by a factor of about 10 than anything else.
Are you saying that people in the Rutherfords had family reunions in order to meet girls? Was that the idea, or?
Absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like it was rather. You know the way in Rudyard Kipling. The elephants get together and stamp around at night. Just rather like that. Once in a while. Of course, it always. I mean, this from Ireland. It's funerals.
Oh yes, wakes. Yes.
Wakes.
Yeah.
That's where you find them.
When you were transitioning from book selling to book writing, you said
Yes.
a book that changed your life was A Confederacy of Dunces.
Yes.
By John Kennedy Toole.
Yes.
How?
Yes. Okay. So I had been. Do people? Some of you, I'm sure you do, go to England, and you know.
God, yes.
You know the Waterstone bookshops.
Yes.
Okay. So for years and years, I worked for Tim Waterston. I'm actually godfather of one of his children before he ever did the bookshops. We were in book distribution and publishing, both sides of the Atlantic. He was my mentor, a wonderful and charismatic and mercurial mentor. And so I had a very happy life. I'd started trying to write a book as soon as I came down from university. And I'd gone back, and then I'd taken time off. I'd said to Tim, I'm going to go and write. He also has written novels since. And he said, I remember so well, he then had 6 children, he has 8 or 10 now. And he sort of said, well, I can't do that, but you'll be surprised how much I'd like to. So anyway, I went off and did that and wrote 12 plays, and then came back to Tim and said, well, I'm broke now. And he gave me a job again. Prince, that man. So then I worked, and of course, like all entrepreneurs, they make you work so hard you've no time to write.
Were you in a bookshop? Were you working in a shop?
No, mostly selling and marketing books. And then I had my own publishing list. I mean, I have worked in bookshops, but
Right.
So book selling in one shape or form, and I loved it. I love the book business. I love the smell of books. I like being in warehouses. So that was fine. And then I had the idea, well, if I can't write, maybe I can have as I had my own list by this time, maybe I could set up my own publishing house. And after Tim got fired and went off to found his book chain, which of course the best thing that ever happened to him, his successor, who was a very, very nice man, became my second mentor. And he was crazy on business education. He was actually a graduate of Stanford. And he got me and 3 or 4 other guys he was mentoring to go and look at business schools, which the English didn't think was a good idea at all. Because as the guy from Smith's said to me, we don't like people to go to business school because they might not come back. So anyway, I was lucky enough to do something called the Sloan Course, which is an MBA for geriatrics, at Stanford, which is a wonderful one-year course. And I was about the youngest person on it in my early 30s. And I came out of that with ideas of setting up my own business. And I actually thought I'd get a little production house going. And I tried to buy the Confederacy of Dunces to get the movie rights. And Johnny Carson owned them. I couldn't get them. And I, futzed around with some other things. And then I was standing in New York looking at a picture one day of Sarum, Salisbury Cathedral, Constable. And there are actually two, one in the Frick and one in the Met. And I suddenly thought, my God, there's my hometown, and Stonehenge, and Michener, and the whole thing suddenly came to me. And so if I'd been able to buy the Confederacy of Dunces, they say that it's cursed, that you can't get a movie made. Who knows, there might have been a great movie, which is still waiting to be made. Still waiting. Instead of which I wrote Sarum.
You told an interviewer that you loved Confederacy of Dunces, had tremendous impact on your career and your life, but there was one book that you wished you'd never read, and that was P.G. Wodehouse, Summer Lightning.
Yeah.
Why?
Any P.G. Wodehouse fans here by any chance, or were you all too young?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Is it Wodehouse or Woodhouse? There's a big
Woodhouse.
debate.
Well, I say I don't know. It's
right,
probably, if you're very grand, you say Woodhouse. I don't know. I just say Woodhouse.
Why did that book scare you?
Because it's perfect. It's perfect. They don't call Woodhouse the master for nothing. There are two great popular masters of the English language who, in my humble opinion, have never been surpassed, perhaps not even by Shakespeare. And one is W.S. Gilbert, as in Gilbert and Sullivan, who I think was his patters and all the rest of it, and also he wrote a lot of other stuff as well as the operettas. The words he managed to work in there for a popular audience, and they responded just as audiences did in Shakespeare's time to this incredibly rich vocabulary. The Victorian music hall tradition is verbally incredibly rich, and that all worked its way into Gilbert and Sullivan. So Gilbert is one, and I would say that P.G. Wodehouse is the other. And Summer Lightning is so perfect, you'll never do better. It's also so full of that man's spirit. When my grandmother died, my mother had a younger sister who was still a little girl, and she had to deal with her for the day. And it was a summer's day, they were in the country, and she took her to a haystack and read Summer Lightning to her. And she wrote to P.G. Wodehouse just to let him know, that she'd done that. And then Justin said, has anyone ever seen a program on television? It's a British program called The Sky at Night with Patrick Moore. He was a lovely guy, and he would get wildly enthusiastic. And my father would say, I've never seen a fellow get so excited about what we do not know. And this is the moon made of cheese? Well, of course it may be. But we think probably it's something quite different, and we still don't know, and we may not know for years, and there it is. And he's a fantastic man. When my father had agonizing back pains in his last years, this was the one thing, apart from obviously some painkillers, that was able to, give him a little pleasure in life. So that's what Wodehouse does, I think, for a lot of people.
Before we get our audience to ask you a couple of questions, you said earlier that you love books, the heft of them, the smell. You love to be in warehouses and so on. And everyone is saying the book is, as we know it or knew it, is dead. It's on life support. Do you buy that? Pardon me, be replaced by the e-book or the reader or?
I wondered, but I think absolutely not. For a whole bunch of reasons. For a whole bunch of reasons. Actually, I mean, looking at my own kids, the younger generation, because of their computer screens, they're actually reading more. And my own kids, I had difficulty getting my kids to read books, amazingly, and probably because I wrote books, and so they'd come in and see me writing, and that probably put them off, I would say. Once one of the teachers at my son's school said to my son, "Are you going to be a writer like your dad?" And he shook his head very thoughtfully. He was then aged 8 and said, "Oh no, it's much too difficult." But, you know, everybody, first of all, we all need information, but secondly, everybody wants to be told stories, and it just doesn't change. And the thing about ebooks is there's two rather interesting developments that everybody's suddenly noticing about ebooks. One is that they are helpful for people that want large print. So the large print book may well gradually become a thing of the past. And there's a double whammy there, because of course the large print book by its nature is going to be physically bigger. So by the time you get one of my books in large print, you know, you're probably too old to lift it anyway. So that's one thing, and they can, you know, they're using their devices for that. But the other thing is, you know what's happening? People are buying the books, and they're buying the e-books as well. Yeah. So they're reading the book at home, and then they want to go on reading it, and they're traveling, and they're going, you know, in the subway or this and that. So they continue reading, you know, and so forth. So it's just turning out to be much more complex than we expected it to be. I never worry about the world coming to an end until it comes to an end. Thanks to one thing, which is human boredom. And so you get this terrible homogenizing of everything, including books. But it's okay, because very soon they'll all get bored. And then all the little boutiques and the individualistic books and so forth will bubble up again, you know, like plants. So it's going on forever. And libraries will be here forever, and that's great.
Mr. Rutherfurd, you take a few questions?
Sure, and may I, before we start, may I just apologize to this side of the room? I was conscious when I was speaking that I could hear, somehow when I was slightly this way, I could hear, because of course it was there because we were talking, I could hear the microphone making a better sound when I was looking that way. And so every so often I was just looking at you guys and then thinking it's no good, they won't be able to hear, and turning back again. So I wasn't ignoring you, you know.
You want to start over again and just talk to that?
Okay, now I can see a sea of wonderful faces that I didn't see before. But actually I can look over my shoulder and I can still see these guys too. So that's all right.
As I said, the microphone is there if anyone wants to ask a question. While we're waiting, I will ask a question. Can you talk about your next project, or would rather not? Or writers don't usually, novelists don't like to say anything.
Well, I'm still, as I'd already said, I've got a bunch of books on the stocks. There is one that I'm absolutely mad keen to do. I've talked to most of my publishers now. I'm happy to say, a delightful dinner last night. Here with publishers who are very, very, very good guys because they agreed with me. And I'm pretty sure it's coming off. But I have to confess to a very primitive superstition, and my rational mind tells me not to believe in it, that I'm somehow going to jinx it. Right. If I say, but there is another very real consideration. I hate to let you know, especially in such a place, that publishing is not always a gentleman's industry. And my books take time to write. And I have on one occasion had to finish a book in a hell of a hurry because a competing author decided, once he discovered what I was up to get a book out on the same subject but shorter and pit me to the post.
So, that's not on, is it? I mean,
well,
English
it may not be cricket, but it happens. I'm glad to say I was able to get mine out first. I screwed him.
Any questions at all from the audience? I think you've answered. Well, yes, down.
Hi. I wanted to ask about your novel Ruska, which is actually the first one that I read before reading Sarum and London and New York and The Forest and the Irish books and now Paris. What I found fascinating about Ruska was that you created your own Russian village that moved rather than making it about Moscow or about St. Petersburg or even like Suzdal or Kostroma or one of the smaller places. So I'm curious to know, when tackling Russia, why you decided to create your own place rather like Missioner's Island of All Saints rather than using an existing place.
Okay. First, the quick answer, and then, of course, being me, the long answer. The quick answer is Russian history moves from south to north. So you have the old Russia, somewhat more European than the later Russia, centered in the lovely city of Kiev. And so, you know, you're either going to have to move from Kiev to Moscow to Leningrad, St. Petersburg, if you're going to tell the story, you know, in place, so to speak. Or you're going to do what did happen, which was that whole villages would move north. And so for long and complex reasons you will know from wading your way through the book, for which I thank you, you know, they went up after the Mongol invasions and moved up into those northern forests. And a rather more intense and what we think of as more Russian Russia appeared. So hence the two Ruskas. And in fact, I discovered finally on an old map, a Tsarist map from the 19th century, that there was in fact a small village called Ruska, actually near Novgorod, which I didn't even know about when I wrote the book and nobody remembers anymore. But that's why. So that answers that question, I guess. Thank you for wading through the book. It was a second book.
She's read all of your books.
I know. I don't know how you can hold down a job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I was curious whether you've ever sort of considered embarking on a project, peeked into the lobby of culture or the history of a region and thought, oh, no, and walked away. If you ever sort of considered taking on an area or a period of history and then just thought, no.
Dropped the project after getting into it and saying, no, it's not for me?
Well, projects often just, you know, quietly die. They seem exciting and then they go away. Yeah, that does happen, but not necessarily from fear of tackling the subject, just because the subject doesn't seem to grow in the mind. I have a project which I've been passionately wanting to do. I have two actually, but one above all I've been passionately wanting to do for 12 years, and it's a huge subject and I know exactly what I want to do. And for 12 years, I've been unable to get my publishers anywhere to let me do it. Well, they'll let me do it, but barely. So it's no good. It's stillborn. One day, when all of you guys have bought so many of my books that I can just say, right, I will do anything I like, or once my children are supporting me, I will write that book. And I'll send you a free copy.
I brought a card. That actually ties into a quick second question, which is, I think you're in a unique position to talk a bit both as an author and as someone who's worked in the publishing industry about the changes to the industry. Because for me, as someone who sort of works as a bookseller, there are very strange and dynamic things happening now in the book industry, with Amazon buying up complete rights to authors' works and so on. And I'm also wondering how that impacts on publishers with sort of diminished margins and their willingness to back certain kinds of projects. And so I'd be interested to see what publishing looks like to you now.
Okay. The gorilla has just entered the room. So, I will give you a brief, but as good an answer as I can, because nobody knows what's going to happen, of course. And it's interesting to come here where publishing a book and promoting a book is still being done in the same way. whereas in America, for instance, in the US, it's completely changed, and the book tour, as we know, it is still happening, but not. I'm not doing it. Mind you, I've done all the events down the years, but still, it's all done virtually now. But what you're really getting at is something much more profound. We have a situation where, first of all, I'm going to deal with the bookstores first, if I may, and then Amazon, which is tricky. We have big retailers who tried, like Barnes & Noble, to operate like sort of super independent bookstores, but it's just not the same. And most of those retailers are now in deep trouble. We've lost Borders, Waterston's in trouble, Barnes & Noble is struggling. Things are a little better in Canada, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. And what's going to happen? It's a huge distribution problem. Curiously, in the United States, there are signs of the independent booksellers actually starting to bubble up again, despite all that's going on. And the great independent booksellers still have a business. I do have, I believe, a solution for this problem, a business solution. And it goes against the grain for most independent booksellers, but I do believe passionately, and I mean, I'd almost stop writing if I could be the guy that could go in there and organize it. I do believe that it is possible. I think that independent booksellers have got to form cooperatives to give them huge purchasing power. I think it's legal. Especially we're talking in the US of A, but other places too. It will give them the purchasing power to get the discounts. This in particular matters in the United States because with the antitrust legislation, which is now doing the exact reverse of what it was intended to do, it was intended to level the playing field and it's done the reverse. It is, you can't give generous discounts unless people buy huge quantities because it's illegal. If they would form cooperatives, they could, I think, quite legitimately buy large quantities of books which can then be delivered individually to the individual bookstores, which is what happens. Waterston's, for instance, in England, for a long time operated without a central warehouse. It worked just fine. The difficulty is, the mindset for most independent booksellers is not for doing that. But they should, and I think that it could transform our bookseller life very much for the better, and there would be a mass of bookstores, independents, to take the place of the big chains if, or possibly when, they are no longer with us.
Thank you. Mr. Edward Rutherfurd.